Good morning, Tony.
Hello, good
How are you?
morning. Really well. How are you, Natalie?
Great. Ready to talk about digital ownership?
Of course.
Okay.
Super, yeah.
So let's just start in. Like, why are we even having this chat about digital ownership?
Oh, God.
Why are we talking about digital ownership? What's the deal? It's a buzzword now. What does it mean? What do we mean?
Well, I guess things have changed a lot over the last, I would say, 5 years, more or less, since the blockchain not only appeared, but also since people started using it, not just for transferring cryptocurrencies, which is something that you just care about how many Bitcoin you have, the total amount that you have. People in 2017, they started using it as well to, store things that you can own, but where you care about which particular thing you own. So it's not the same owning three cars, one of which is a Mercedes, or the other is a Ferrari, and the other one is a Seat. You don't really care about having three. You really care about which three ones you have, right? So this owning something that is unique and differentiated from any other thing is something that just started being used seriously over the last 5 years, and this has caused a massive revolution in different industries. It's just the beginning, but it's changing a lot of things.
Okay, interesting. So how do NFTs ensure the authenticity of digital assets and unique ownership?
All right, so at the technical level, what you're doing is just writing in a computer that is shared by everyone and that is decentralized, permissionless, like Ethereum, for example. There are a number of them. You're just writing there. This serial number is owned by this Web3 address, by this person that controls this Web3 address. It's basically assigning a register in this computer to someone. But not only that, you're also trying to say what that identification number, what that serial number actually refers to. So is that serial number identifying a car? Is that identifying a sword in a video game, or something related to a loyalty program? So you're also trying to store that, right? The ownership of that is very clear. It is written in the blockchain. What that really describes is really not so clear, but people are starting to use it as if it was clear as well, let's say. And they started using digital ownership in that sense, in that, that I own this serial number.
And each one is unique.
And each one is unique, yes. So if you ask the blockchain, okay, this serial number, what does it describe, right? There are different means it has to describe. Eventually it will describe whether it's an axe, whether it's a loyalty program's card, what that really is. So yeah, they are all unique, identifiable, and with their own history and their own past and their own future. So yeah, they are all unique. This is super, super important.
And so blockchain technology has really enabled this to exist at all, this concept?
Exactly. So in the past, in digital applications, you used to own things, right? In a video game, when you enter a video game, you control a character. The character is yours, in a sense. The character may have a costume or something you've bought for the character, and that's supposed to be yours as well, right? The big difference is that in the past, before the blockchain, you were not allowed to transfer that for real money. Even if that could have been some, a character or costume that was super useful or super valuable to others, you would not be allowed to transfer that for real money. And the reason was that if, those things were stored in the past in the game servers, right? If we're talking about a video game. So if the video game company is allowing you to do that, they're basically stating that they are storing in their private servers things of monetary value, that have value outside even the video game, right? So they are basically becoming a custody service. They are becoming a bank if they allow you to do that. And that's basically going against all regulations, and they were not doing that. They knew there was a lot of interest. People, companies tried to do that in a legal way, and it took a massive amount of time and it never really succeeded. That's why people ended up doing that in the black market. There's a massive black market for video game items, for example, right? But it's illegal, and the reason why it was illegal, and still is if you do it this way, is that the video games and the companies that provide these digital applications have to become banks to allow you to do that. With a blockchain, this completely changes, right? So the blockchain is the bank, and you, the owner of that asset, are the sole custodian, you're the sole responsible person in the world to be the custodian of that asset. The video game company, the digital application developer, they have nothing to do with you owning that. right? They've really literally given it to you, and there is no bank involved. There's just the blockchain. So you can really, for the first time, without an infrastructure, without a huge, massive amount of lawyers in your team, you can actually build applications that just give these things to users, let them trade them if they want for monetary value. They can do many other things in the blockchain, and run your application legally and with confidence.
Got it. So this is really this kind of concept of empowerment of users, or putting the power back in people's hands by literally giving them like real, genuine ownership without it being tied to something, some kind of greater power, some corporate structure, some sort of...
Exactly. So this completely changes the paradigm. What's happening now is that people have started to acquire these things. Some of them for a very expensive price, some of them for a very reasonable price. People are starting to build, like their baggage of items they've been buying from video games, from artists, from people they really love, things that matter to them. So they have all that, and from different applications, right? So think about the change of paradigm. In the past, there would be no incentive for a video game, say, to make your items compatible with a third-party video game that maybe it's even a competitor. Why would I allow you to, bring your character to this other video game? Now, what's starting to happen is that me, the user, who have already paid for it, I already give a lot of value to these things I own, I want to be able to use them in different video games. And if you don't allow me to use my stuff in this world you are creating for me, I'm going to go next door. There's a very similar video game, which, by the way, allows me to enter with all my stuff inside. So suddenly, video games are starting to have all the incentives to allow these things you've been acquired, these NFTs, to be imported in their video games. To all these compatibility issues between, how am I gonna bring a 3D thing from this video game to this other one? Those are gonna be gone in 2 years' time at most. They're starting to work on that to make compatible, right? Because for the first time, there is incentive for all the industry to be compatible with these things, these digital things that you are buying from everywhere in the world.
Is this other buzzword, interoperability?
This is one of the aspects of that people refer to when they use the word interoperability. This one refers to things that you've been acquiring in different digital applications or even in the physical world. How am I going to use them in other applications they've never thought of, so that I would be appearing there with my Nike shoes suddenly in Fortnite or things like this. So interoperability, one of the aspects is how to make these things compatible in these different metaversive worlds and digital applications.
I guess that also ties into this digital identity concept, right? Because if you can take these things that these digital assets that we own and that define us and kind of help create our image and our identity, and we can take them to other worlds, digital worlds with us, then it's there's a consistency there, right?
I agree. I think you're touching a point that is more profound than just what I said. So, but I was referring before to just being able to, hey, I've bought these things, I would like to use them in this virtual world in terms of utility, right? This is important. Right. But you're touching on the point of identity. How do I really feel? How do I see myself as a human? This goes beyond many things, right? But what's happening, and not just with the blockchain, but in general these days, is that, these new generations, they are interacting so much more online than the previous ones, to the point that some of them actually interact more online than in the physical world, right? So the way you perceive yourself, in the past, it used to be through the way my friends see me, the way my colleagues at work see me, right? So the way I dress makes sense. The car I have, people cared a lot about the car they had, right? Because it was a symbol of status, because people were seeing the car, right? But now nobody sees my car. If I'm just interacting online, they actually see my character, they see the things I wear in these, in Roblox, these kind of things, right? So the things that I own now, that I really, really, really own through the blockchain, is the things that people see me with when they interact with me, right? So I'm wearing these costumes, I'm wearing this sword or whatever. So it becomes part of the way I see myself as well. So it becomes part of your identity. I think this is profound, and this is, again, a massive driver for a change in the way digital applications interact with their users.
Interesting. So in the event of like a data breach, fraud, bankruptcy, who is liable for the loss of these digital owned assets?
That's a super good point. There's a standard answer to that, and there's a worrying answer to that. So it depends on what you're talking about. So if you're talking about cryptocurrencies, for example, everything that has to do with, whether you own Bitcoin and whether you've transferred them to me if you are paying for a service or something, I don't need to ask anyone in the world. I just look at the blockchain. I can see that you actually did that transfer, that it was really authorized by you, etc. So you are the sole custodian of your assets if you are talking about crypto. I'm the sole responsible for checking that that transfer went through. So users are really, this is the standard answer. Users, the owners of stuff, they are the sole responsible for being the custodian of basically the private keys that control those things.
Right.
This is the standard answer. But when you start digging, you realize that with especially NFTs, not with cryptocurrencies, but with NFTs, this is not really how most applications have it built. Going back to what you write in the blockchain, right? You need to write, we're talking about unique themes, right? So in the blockchain, you would like to write, okay, the identifier of that thing, a number, who owns it, right? This is still true, people write that. But then what is this thing? And this is the crucial point. What that thing really describes, most of the times, is basically just a URL, an external address to internet, to a private server, that will return to you what that thing really is. So, for example, if I go to OpenSea and I check one of the most famous fantasy video games in soccer that have been going on there, you can go there, you can see the card of the football player, it's been changing, oh, that's amazing. When you actually check what OpenSea is displaying for you, OpenSea is forced to go to these private companies' servers, download the image of what that is, the state, whether it has level 40 or strength 50. All this data is stored in a private server, not in the blockchain. So it's not true that I'm the custodian of that asset anymore. Actually, if those private servers go down, they're switched off, even for legislation, maybe it could not be a badly intentioned action. It could be some mistake because they have to close down operations, right? All those assets are gone, all of them. And you cannot do anything, basically, in that respect, absolutely nothing. You lose all the stuff you bought. So what I'm saying is that the standard answer is superficial. When you apply that to NFTs, in general, you have to really dig deeper and check whether this standard answer still applies. And in a massive amount of cases, it does not. Right now, maybe I can bring up a very important topic that just recently happened.
Sure.
In that regard, right? So because users most of the time, they just want to see it, they see the baseball card or whatever there, and they just really don't care about what's behind. But legislation does. For example, a few weeks ago, there was a lawsuit filed against Dapper Labs and NBA Top Shots, which is they are pioneers. They are guys I really respect. And the video game they've built, or the game they've built, was about trading basketball cards, right? Now the lawsuit is against those cards being considered actually securities. That means, again, that we're on the previous paradigm where the game has to become a bank. That means basically that they are, in a sense, saying that the custodian of those cards, they're really not the users, in a sense.
Okay.
At a deeper level, what the judge has been starting to agree, and I think it's not fully resolved, so we have to follow what that's going to lead to, is that the success of those were considered an investment, but not just an investment. It's just an investment that depends on others for the price of that card to continue to be, reasonable or go up or down, etc. It doesn't depend on you. What that really is, if you look at what the judge really said, it's basically that both the infrastructure, the marketplace, and the data that card really, those basketball cards described, that's really not owned by the owner. That's really fully controlled by just one single company, right?
Okay.
Which is part of the Howey test that the judge went through. And this is just the beginning, I think. It's just starting to show to the world that if we use the blockchain just partially, just some of the benefits, that I can write the owner.
Right, like on part of the transaction, on part of the agreement.
Yeah, like not fully, not in a fully decentralized. If it's fully decentralized, then yes, we can forget about the banks, in a sense, right? And we can run all these operations in a fully decentralized, the small companies can give away all these things and they just depend on you. So yeah, you have more responsibility, but we don't have this responsibility as developers, right? But if you just use the blockchain partially, because it's complicated, right? There's a reason, the technical reason why these things are hard.
Okay.
And I just write the owner, but I don't write, for example, what that thing really is describing, that I still keep it on my private servers, for example.
Right.
Then you start having trouble with legislation for a very good reason, because you can destroy everything you gave to the users. These are sources of scams as well. People, they just change what those private servers are returning to you. So yeah, legislation is catching up with not using the blockchain in a properly decentralized way, which goes back to your question of who owns what. Yeah, you own just a serial number and a URL to an external private server in many cases.
Right.
So that's not using the blockchain properly.
Right. Interesting. I guess it's not using the blockchain fully to the full extent, right? And there's kind of an inherent promise within NFTs of being a Web3 technology, it being blockchain based. There's an inherent promise that the entire life cycle of the use of that NFT will be based on the blockchain. I mean, that's the assumption, I suppose, but I don't know if people are really thinking about that or really understand.
I think users, they just want to see that it works.
Right.
The users, then they complain a lot when this thing is a scam or when the company goes away. So, but when they enter, they just care about it being beautiful and working and all that stuff. I think it's legislation's responsibility to make sure that what you are actually doing is safe.
Right.
And I kind of agree with some of these actions that are being taken in that respect. We need to work hard for technology to actually, in the case of NFTs, to really provide you with a security that you expect when you're using the blockchain.
Yeah, exactly. Got it. Thank you. So another question: can digital ownership be transferred or gifted in the same way a physical asset can be? How easy is it?
Yeah, so it definitely can, right? It's one of the main pillars of NFTs, for example, or anything you build on the blockchain, that you can transfer value in general, not just NFTs, and that you can do that in a permissionless way and in a way that only you, the owner of the original asset, right, or the thing that's going to be transferred, can authorize, right? So yeah, it can be done in my opinion, a very convenient way from everywhere in the world, just with a click or a couple of clicks, right? It's so much easier than going to the black market for video games, where people have been doing that for decades already, right? Where you have to expect the other guy that will actually, send you back the good you're paying for, and you never know. And compared to that, it's like whitening everything that was being done incorrectly in the past, and allowing new marketplaces and new use cases to appear. Right? So yeah, it can be done very conveniently. The only friction point there, if you want, is that with power comes responsibility, and you, the user, the owner of things, you have to know how to manage private keys seriously. So it's not like we're using the Web 2, a world where when you lose your password, there's always a way to recover it.
Right.
No, here there is no way to recover it. So otherwise, somebody will be the custodian, and we're going back to the Web 2 world, right? So managing the private passwords, I think, is something that over the years we're going to see better UX and new flows that will make your life easier.
Right.
But currently, I would say it's perhaps the largest friction point for standard users.
Okay. Okay, interesting. Thank you. So, are there any limits to what can be owned digitally?
Are there any limits? Yes and no. So, on the one hand, things that are fully digitally native, like or even blockchain native, like cryptocurrencies, they are just born in the blockchain, right? They make sense in the blockchain. You can own as many as you want. You can do crazy things there, really crazy things like own loans, flash loans. There's DeFi. There's so many things you can do. Now the question comes from when you start thinking about this digital representation being the representation of something that is physical, for example. And when we start unlocking that, I think things are going to go wild and crazy. For example, say property, right? So say I would like to put my property on the blockchain. So I bypass, in a sense, what do you call, perdona, ¿cómo se llaman los notarios? Notary, yeah.
Notary.
Having that. So I bypass the notary in a sense, right? So I managed to put my property represented in the blockchain somehow, and I allow anyone to do whatever they want with that. So I can transfer the entire house easily, okay, but I can write smart contract logic that do really crazy things with that. Like people can own fractional parts of my apartment, let's say, and they can decide what happens with that apartment depending on how many shares of that they have, and they can just sell part of the shares and keep, or ask for a loan, where you put as collateral your apartment.
Right.
And there's a smart contract logic that cannot be violated, right? That says I either return the loan in a month's time or in a year time, or the ownership is transferred, right? So all these crazy things, I think they will start appearing when we start solving the problem of how to enforce things in the physical world by things that happen in the blockchain. But it's so much more convenient in a sense, the amount of things that you can put on top, that I think eventually it will happen. It will take time because these things are rooted in society, but it will come.
Okay, interesting. So can creators and digital artists protect their digital ownership rights? Is this a thing that we're seeing play out already?
I guess you're asking whether that is changed or impacted by blockchain.
By blockchain, exactly.
So yes and no. Let's see. So I can, without the blockchain, right? I can already launch a website with paintings that I don't own the rights for, right? And I can try to make money out of that, right? It's illegal, and there's legislation that protects the rightful owners of that, and they can do stuff against me, right? I would say that in the blockchain the same thing happens. I can try to sell a JPEG of a painting that I don't own, right? If I manage to convince somebody that I actually owned it, etc., and so on and so forth, people can act. I mean, the legislation can act against me. Okay. I think there's been a lot of talking about that, and I don't think really is a significant problem. I see more or less the same issues that you have in the Web 2 world, in the Web 3 world, right?
Okay.
The difference is that now you can do all these things in a clear, transparent way worldwide and put a smart contract, all sort of business logic that is interesting for you on top. For example, I can sell digital artists, right? They can sell, their creations, and even transfer some rights to the new owner of that creation that they decide. So together with the creation, I can actually write there. So I'm licensing, say, a reproduction of this painting in not more than an A3 format, something like this, which, by the way, I think CryptoKitties did something like this originally. You could own a cat, but you couldn't print it larger than a certain size. Only they could, actually. And you can even change that. You can evolve that license. So if the owner, I don't know, is faithful, is doing things that are super cool for the community, so on and so forth, he or she may own an extended set of rights. So you, the creator, can actually grant and modify the license that comes with that later on, saying, hey, actually you can use it for profit if you want. You can set up a museum, hang it on the wall, and charge tickets to get in that museum because it's really yours, and you can really now use it for all these purposes. So I think you can do it. It extends the possibilities that you have as a creator to do it in a proper way, and in a way that is not super rigid from the beginning, and in a way that you find your own business logic that suits your goals better.
Right, got it. Thank you. So tell us about these NFTs as speculative assets. What happened there? What's happening now after that bubble burst?
Yeah, by the time you referred to, we were setting up the company. We started in 2019 and telling people that knew nothing about the blockchain that, hey, this is what the blockchain is about. These are NFTs. The first use of NFTs is going to be speculative. It's going to be a huge bubble. People will invest and get in that bubble, and it will burst. And we're building something that is coming after that bubble, right? For the longer term, really added value to the mainstream user kind of thing. So it was hard those days, and it was nevertheless easy to predict, and that's where we are right now. So yeah, the initial usage of NFTs has been fully speculative. They've been, we heard about scarcity. The first thing I heard, NFTs bring scarcity to the digital world for the first time, right? Is you cannot just copy paste. It means which pasted thing we're talking about, as we mentioned. I was blown away. I was, oh yeah, that's really amazing. Yet I was not motivated at all by extreme scarcity, which has been the initial application of NFTs, right? People have been putting NFTs out there in a super highly scarce amount, hoping to, burst the initial selling price of those assets as much as possible, and many of them managed. And the users, the owners, the buyers of those, mostly they were basically investors, of people with an investment profile, right? Who were acquiring those assets, expecting that at some point they would be able to sell them for a higher price. But selling is exactly the same thing. So that's almost the definition of speculative, right? Because it doesn't depend on you or anyone. It just depends on the hype of how much someone else is going to be willing to pay for the same asset you bought, right? So this is almost like buying shares, or it's really like an investment. And no doubt some people are wanting to consider that securities as opposed to utilities, right?
Okay.
So this has been the initial usage. And the world is not like that, right? Like how many things you own at home? Like probably thousands of things you've bought, from clothes to furniture to, sure. You can imagine, right? It's almost as if you went to a shopping mall and there would be only two things that you can buy these days, and they are NFTs, or not even that. You need to go to the shopping mall, a kilometer away because they have NFTs there. That's the situation we've seen. The mainstream person, right, is not interested and should not be interested in this business model. However, digital ownership is so much more than this, right? The world is not at that level of scarcity, the interesting world at least, right? So with digital ownership, you can go way farther if you have the technical means to do that. If you, first of all, maybe we should pause. So why has this been the initial use case? There is a technical reason behind, right? Remember, the first digital application that really, was flourishing with NFTs was CryptoKitties, 2017. They completely collapsed the blockchain, Ethereum, with around 10,000 daily active users, right? This is peanuts, and it was doing the minimal amount of things. If it's writing a register, it's not even a game in a proper sense, right? 10,000 active users killed Ethereum. 5 years later, other games like Sunflower Land, for example, they blocked completely the underlying blockchain, Polygon, which is supposed to be a scaling solution to Ethereum, right? 5 years later, with roughly 5 times more daily active users, right? How are we going to scale that? How are we going to scale to the amount of things that the mainstream owner owns? Right? So you need technology to do that, to build a different business model, a different use case that appeals to the mainstream, right? And in order to do that, you need many things. In particular, you need a highly scalable infrastructure that allows you to basically transition, and this is something we like the term, transition from this economy of scarcity and speculation to an economy of abundance, right? And users-generated value, this UGV as opposed to UGC.
So it's like from scarcity to abundance, from
speculation, right?
Speculation to user-generated value. So these new values, if you will, these are replacing the old ways.
We think so. We are really seeing that there is a big push for that, and that the mainstream user really is much more engaged with that. So this new paradigm is one where it's much closer to the real life. So it's one where you as a creator, as a company, as a game developer, as a loyalty program issuer, you can drop millions of NFTs to anyone for the zero initial price, just for signing up in the platform, for downloading the app, for joining the community, right? So zero initial friction point. You just own NFTs without even realizing, right? So those are going to have initial value, market value zero as well, right? It's completely opposite to aiming at a super high initial price, right? But what can you do with that? If you allow the user, the owner of those assets, to modify them according to the rules you've set, right? If it's a loyalty program because you act on the, do things, good things for the community, or have the issuer likes you doing, or if it's a video game because you have talents and you put passion and you evolve your character or your sword, your weapon, whatever it is in a digital application. If you allow the user to change that and evolve it, make it better, make it more usable to others, basically you will allow him to increase the market value because others will be potentially willing to pay for what you've created, right?
Okay.
So in that paradigm, most assets will never be traded, right? They will be just created. They will just be used for engagement, for, this feeling of belonging, and potentially for being evolved into something of value, right? And only the tip of those NFTs created are going to be worth tradable, right? But tradable for a fair value, you're not going to be depending on others to provide market value to you. It's not hype, it's not speculation, it's you. So we strongly believe in that model and this is just one of the many things you can do with digital ownership. And I think this is one that will lead to huge changes and I think to the mainstream. I would bring NFTs to mainstream in a fair paradigm way.
Interesting. So speaking of the mainstream, speaking of the future, as we start to see, these new technologies adopted more en masse, and as the onboarding gets easier and the UX, the whole experience of using Web3 technologies and NFT technology becomes easier and more accessible, what does that mean for the future of digital ownership? Like, where are we going? Where do you see this whole thing leading to?
Yeah, so I think we're going towards a future where owning digital assets is going to be part of everyday's life of almost everyone. Just like we perhaps wouldn't anticipate grandparents to use the internet for live streaming or for talking to each other in different parts of the world 25 years ago, right? And it happened. I'm pretty sure that the same thing is going to happen with digital ownership. It's going to be part of everyone's life every day. And we're going to see, so the amount of things that people are starting to acquire it's always ever growing, of course. There's going to be a point where things are going to turn. So when the critical mass has arrived, enough people owning enough digital assets, every single application in the world will have to allow you to use those assets in their application somehow. Maybe just showing them, maybe actually evolving them in their application, so on and so forth, because the incentive is going to be there. Because as I said before, right, if you don't allow me to do that, I'm going to go to the application next door, then it's almost the same, but allows me to. Right? So that tilting point is not far in the future. We're not even going to realize that suddenly we're going to see NFTs everywhere and all applications allowing us to use NFTs in their words.
Okay. So speaking of Freeverse and living assets, is this what living assets will enable? Like this living asset technology will enable this, what you're speaking of?
Yeah, I think the main new use cases and massive new use cases that we're allowing already actually, is this one where you've transitioned to abundance and users generated value, right?
Okay.
So being able to give away millions of NFTs, not just at zero gas cost, which is important, but without collapsing anything, right? So being able to stay online and maintaining operations and allowing users to evolve them, in a way that is secure. And this brings us back to the securities thing, in a way that they control. So 100% of all applications that you see out there, right, these days that do scale beyond 100 assets per day if you wanted, that try to allow users to allow some sort of evolution on the NFTs, all of them are actually storing the data of that NFT in private servers, because there's no other way of doing that in a way that scales, and then you use technology that is not just straightforward layer 1 Ethereum or Polygon, right? So the way things have been evolved up to now is non-secure. I think legislation will catch up and go against all these video games. It's the elephant in the room, right? Like, we all know it. Many users don't, but the guys that are building it, they know it and they don't talk about it until legislation will talk about it. So we allow this to happen, all this evolution massively, in a way that the user is the full custodian of the asset and the data of the asset, not just this tiny register that says I own it, but also the register that says, what am I owning, right?
Okay.
So yeah, I think living assets will allow this new paradigm to exist and to succeed in the world.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. Just one last thing. I want to make sure that we're clear on this concept of user-generated value, because it's a bit complicated, but I think at the most sort of basic level, it's not so complicated. So can you explain to us, like in a nutshell, what you mean by, like, we know user-generated content, that's like Web 2.0, right? It's like, wow, everybody can create stuff and put it online and everyone can interact around it. But in Web 3, in this new world, we're moving to user-generated value. Can you tell us just what that means in a nutshell?
Sure. So when I acquire an NFT, these days, most of the times, I'm going to be selling exactly the same thing I bought. So the value of that NFT depends zero on me, on what I did with it, right? On whether I interacted with it while I owned
Right,
it.
a static NFT, first generation
Yeah.
NFT, right? Okay.
Now think of a living asset or a dynamic NFT where once I own something and I acquire it, I start doing something in the platform that created it or in the ecosystem that allows that asset to be operated in.
Okay.
Be it a video game, be it a loyalty program, whatever.
Okay.
If I start changing it, morphing it, evolving it in a way that is nicer to others, more valuable to other users of that platform, of that ecosystem, maybe it gives you more rights in the loyalty program, maybe it's a more powerful weapon in a video game, whatever it is. If it's more valuable to others because I did something with it, then it has captured my value that I provided as a user. So this is the user-generated value kind.
Got it.
The final market value of anything that I will be seeing around, hopefully, will depend on what users, on the previous owners of those things did with them.
Right.
And I think this is super powerful. This is more fair than the current situation that we see, and definitely much more engaging.
Okay, got it. And so I understand the other thing you're suggesting in terms of this securities issue and all of this is that each of those actions that a user takes to create more value in their dynamic NFT would ideally be recorded on the blockchain and visible to anyone to see at any time, and not owned by the company who created that technology that made the NFT.
Let's say that what I owned at every moment, right? I can be the custodian of that. So this data, which is a description of the NFT, but it could be the image, the properties, the attribute it has. Instead of being in a private server, it's in a decentralized world, environment, infrastructure.
Right.
And in particular, is so decentralized that even I am the full responsible for that to continue existing. I'm not the only one that will, guarantee that this will continue existing. Yeah, there's a lot of incentives for all the players in this decentralized ecosystem to maintain all the data. Right. But even if they were removed from Earth, you, the owner of the asset, as long as it's in your hard drive, you can upload it again in this decentralized system. It will perdure and you're there forever. Right. So to the point, it's not just that this data is still available. To the point that for the first time, it's so strong, this link, that the data is not owned by the company, that anyone with, for example, with living assets, the technology we provide, I think this illustrates how hard this thing is. Anyone can permissionlessly write a smart contract with the logic they decide that uses those attributes of the asset. You cannot these days because those attributes are in a private server owned by someone else outside the blockchain. But because now they are going to be interlinked, right? I can write a simple smart contract just for anyone to understand a simple use case that says, anyone can sponsorize this event, right? It's an event where there's going to be a championship. People come up there with their assets to play a nice game. And I don't know, the sponsors put a small pot, I don't know, $10 each, something like this. So if somebody appears with an asset of, I don't know, level 20, because they managed to arrive to level 20, if they did something great and they spend time, can claim the pot, right?
Okay.
So this is the first time that you can use it in a smart contract logic that proves that the data is stored, it's basically captured by the blockchain, not by some external private server, and hence it is secure and decentralized.
Right.
And not depending on others functioning for your asset to remain perdure and,
right,
and be successful.
Right. Got it. Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to tell us before we...
No. I was expecting that you would ask me whether I should buy a monkey or an ape or not.
Of course. Well, that conversation, I'm still thinking about it. Should I buy a Bored Ape?
So, definitely not now. But
it's that way.
Yeah, but a few months ago, I would have told you, not if you're not a high-risk investor, right?
Okay.
So, if you want to bet your money on things that don't depend on you, and you have enough money to bet a lot of money and not be impacted by losing it, then you may consider it. But if you were a mainstream person, in terms of not wanting to invest in high-risk assets, I would have definitely told you not to. Those were pure high-risk investments.
They were. So that's a thing of the past. Do you think that's not going to happen again? Like, are we going to go back to this like hype and speculation bubble with NFTs? Is that just like, everyone's talking about it's a bear market. So when we go back to a bull market, won't we just start up with more Bored Apes and more speculation, hype, and investing in people getting rich and other people?
Good question. I think it's difficult to predict. I doubt that it's going to reach the success, if you want to call, of the previous bubble. I think people have learned what that really means. There may be, some ups and downs,
right?
But I doubt it. I think at least regarding NFTs, we're going to start seeing the long tail where you really add value to average users,
right?
Not just high risk investors. And that's going to be slower and eventually provide more value than the previous bubble, definitely.
So it sounds like we're talking about a very similar technology. We're talking about NFTs in general. But it sounds like two very different applications. Like there's one that's like the static NFT based on scarcity and speculation and investment. That's an investment piece for high risk, for people who want to play that game. But then there's these NFTs, which are this new wave, or maybe just a different way of using NFT technology, which is about utility and this user-generated value that you speak of, and like more of a long-term sort of process in terms of creating value rather than this like very quick high-value drop. It's more of like this long tail, as you say, kind of increase in value.
Yeah.
So like two different things, like same technology, two different applications.
To me, they are, the technology is similar in the sense that it all refers to digital ownership, but they are so different. They are different beasts to me. And this is the normal cycle. I mean, when there's new technology, normally you have this initial hype, and there's the bubble is burst, and there's something longer term value provided. I think with cryptocurrencies, we've seen the same. At the beginning, people use cryptocurrencies not as a means of payment, but just as a means of speculating again, right?
Right.
I own stuff, so I can sell it for a higher price at some point. In years' time, we're going to see people really using cryptocurrencies just to pay for everyday life, right? And that's going to be a longer term value for the average users, not for investors. Same thing's going to happen with the NFTs. And to make that happen, as always, you need technology that goes beyond the initial features that it had, that just enabled a few use cases to be able to provide the longer term value use cases. Internet did the same thing.
Interesting. Yeah, good point. Thank you, Toni. Anything else?
No, thank you so much. I had a lot of fun.
Great. Thanks.